Welcome to Friday Fish Facts. I'm your host, Ron DeSantis. Man, I'm excited for Primetime Aquatics. I've been looking forward to this one for a while. We've had Jason on the docket here. We are going to do our normal stream just like we normally do this week. I'm going to have questions for Jason. We'll pull questions from the chat, so I'm looking forward to that. And just to give you guys a heads up, next week we're going to do something. We're still going to do a live stream, but a little bit of a different format. Something a little different, no interview. And then the following week, we go back to the regular with creative pet keeping is coming on in 2 weeks. So I just want to welcome Jason. Jason, welcome. Thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you very much. It's really awesome to be here. I've been looking forward to it since we talked about it.
I mean, I've seen you the last time, I think the last time, or was it the first time when you were on with KG Tropicals?
Well, I've only done 2 live streams, so I'm kind of a rookie. I did one on Flip Aquatics channel when we were at Aquatic Experience.
Yeah, I saw that one.
And then I did the one on KG Tropicals sometime last fall. So this is like the second real live stream.
Well, I'm honored that you decided to come on here. I think that week when you were on John's channel, John came on mine the following week. So, yeah.
That's right. I remember him saying that when we were doing the live stream. He's like, "Oh, I'm going to be on Friday next week."
Yeah. I just want to get off right up from the beginning here and ask you how Chaz and Timmy are doing.
Chaz and Timmy are doing good. So for those of you who don't know, Chaz is our Oscar. He's in a 125, and Timmy is his best friend. Timmy is he's like a 17-inch Nile tilapia, and they get along great.
In case you folks haven't seen a video of Creative Pet Keeping, get a tour there, and Kasha put her hand up there, and it's a really big fish. So how many tanks have you got going now, Jason?
So right now throughout the entire house, we've got close to 60. That includes a couple of grow out fry bins. I think there are 6 or 7 upstairs and the rest are downstairs. Okay.
I just want to say hello to everybody who's in the chat today. There's some newcomers here. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. So you've got what would you say, 3 favorite tanks that you've got in the house there? Which ones are those?
Whew, 3 favorite tanks, huh? I would say the ones at least lately, and this changes. It can change from time to time just based on interest and whatever Joanna does to the tanks downstairs. But I really like our Epistogramma. What do we got down there? Epistogramma. I think it's Cockatoides. We've got a 50-gallon lowboy that she really did a good job on with the aquascaping. It's just a lot of fun to look at. I love our multi-tank. We have actually 2 50-gallon lowboys down in our basement, and the other 50-gallon lowboy is our multi-tank, and that colony is just constantly breeding. There's babies everywhere. I love that tank a lot. If I had to pick a third one, it changes, but for right now, it'd probably be my 75-gallon Mbuna tank. I love that tank a lot as well. A lot of color, a lot of action. Every time those fish eat, it's like they've never eaten a day in their life. It's like the first time they've ever eaten.
I love that tank too. There's a ton of color in that tank. Thank you very much, K-Town Reefer, for the super chat, $5.49. Smash the like for Ron. I appreciate that. Thanks, guys. So you've done several collab videos with Creative Pet Keeping, Lucas Fretz. Have you got anything else on the horizon coming up?
I don't know. Probably in the near future, we'll probably do something with Flip Aquatics. We've been talking about me trying to get out by him or him coming out by us. So a lot I'm sure will come out at the Aquashella that's coming up in Dallas this weekend. That should be really cool. So looking forward to that.
You are looking forward to that, eh? So you were at the Aquatic Experience. So was that your first fish convention when you went there?
No, so I think this year was our 3rd or 4th year at the Aquatic Experience. I think the first couple years we didn't even have the YouTube channel. We just went there and just enjoyed it. So I've been to 3 or 4 of those. We went to Aquashella. That was the first time that they had the convention last August, because that's right by our house. That was really cool. Yeah. I'll be heading down to Dallas this weekend, and then this year again we've got Aquashella in Chicago in August, and then we also have the Aquatic Experience coming up in New Jersey again in November. So you're doing all 3 of them this year? That is the hope. So hopefully, I don't have a lot of excuses for not going to Aquashella in August, since it's like a 30-minute drive. The Aquatic Experience is a little bit more, getting the whole family out to New Jersey for a weekend. That'll be a little bit more cumbersome, but that's our hope. Yeah, and a little pricier, right? You got 4 people to
take on a holiday there.
Exactly. And that's one of the reasons why I'm headed down to Aquashella this weekend. I'll leave the family here and they can enjoy life without me, I guess, for a weekend.
So you're going to be involved in the Fishtuber booth and stuff like that. I know there's a bunch of Facebook groups and there's one specifically. So what's your job? What are you helping out with extra there?
Well, that's a great question. My grand plan was to try and schedule a lot of the booth time so that, people knew when certain YouTubers were going to be in the booth, available to meet them. The problem is, by the time we got all that coordinated, it's now, the Wednesday before the weekend. I still haven't really even thought about it much. So that's been a little tough, but I do plan to be in the booth as much as I can. There's going to be a lot of cool stuff going on there. I mean, between the live stream area that they're going to have, the meet and greet area, they've got some games that they're going to be doing. It's going to be really cool.
So how did this all start? Like, you obviously didn't wake up one morning and say, I'm going to have 60 something tanks in my house. Like, what started you in this hobby? Like, how old were you? Like, when you first started?
Well, it all starts back. It's been a long time in the making. So I got my first fish when I was 6 years old. And it really actually pains me to say that it's been almost 40 years. So got a little black fancy goldfish. I remember going to the pet store and we're just going to put this goldfish in a bowl like everybody did back in those days. And I picked out this fish. It was the only black goldfish in the entire store and it was missing an eye. So I remember saying, oh, I want the black goldfish. And my mom's kind of looking at me and the pet store guys looking at me like, are you sure you want that one? It's missing an eye. I didn't care because it was the only black one that was there. So I picked that one out, named him Popeye. And from there, it just took off. So we got the fish bowl. And then I blame my parents a little bit because they allowed me to have like every animal I ever caught at the creek. I could bring that in the house. So frogs, snakes, turtles, crayfish, you name it. I probably had it. And so we started out with the fish bowl, then a 10-gallon, then a 20-gallon. And then even as a kid, I can remember we had the 10-gallon, the 20, and then we had a 30-gallon in the house at the same time. So it started when I was really young and it never really stopped.
So it never stopped. You didn't take a break while you were like going through college and all that. I'm wondering I'm wondering how like the current fish room started.
So the current fish room is a different story. So for the most part, it never really stopped because I always had pretty much at least one tank up and running. When I went to college, I stayed in the area. So I lived, I had my own place. So I had tanks. There was about a year period or so where when we moved into this house, I didn't have anything in the basement going. And then quickly after that, I got that reset up. It was one of those things that just kind of, you get one tank set up and then another one. We had a 75 down there that wasn't set up. So I did that one. And I'm not kidding you, within a week, I bought the 150. And a week after that, I think I bought a 37 and then another 20. And it just went crazy. And so at one point, we had like 8 or 9 tanks down in the basement and maybe a couple up here. And then a really cool thing happened. My wife had a craft room down in the basement. And she decided that she didn't like being in the basement anymore. So she moved her stuff upstairs and said, oh, you can have the basement. And when she told me I could have the basement, I was like, oh yeah, I'm going to do this thing. I'm going to do it right. And so that's when we built out the whole side with the multis and all that stuff and added all those tanks over the course of a couple of months. And then went back on the side with the couch and rebuilt that out as well to make that a little bit more conducive to having multiple tanks, building in the systems for the wastewater, the air system and all that. And it's been a lot of fun.
That Maltese tank is like super, super cool because it's so original. I mean, you don't see tanks like that on YouTube very often.
Yeah. I mean, I saw that tank at a pet store and I was like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. It's 4 feet long. It's 2 feet wide, but it's only 10 inches tall. And I was thinking, okay, this is a really cool thing. And it's really meant to be like a frag tank, saltwater thing, coral tank. And I wanted to put something in there that really utilized the bottom of that tank. And instantly I'm thinking, okay, shell dwellers, we'll throw those in there. It'll be really cool. And it's turned out to be a pretty awesome one. And so much so that I got the other one for the epistogram of the fire reds on the other side.
Yeah, super cool. Unconventional Aquatics. Anthony, thank you very much for the super chat, $19.99. I appreciate that. Thank you very much. We've got a question from Petsotics. He's asking, how did you come up with the name Primetime Aquatics?
All right, so the YouTube story is a little bit different because we had already built out most of the fish room and I had no intentions of doing anything on YouTube, putting stuff out there. And it was my boys, Luke and Eli. They're like, "Oh, Dad, you should put the stuff on YouTube." And they hounded me about that for months. And so finally I said, "Okay, do you really want to do it?" And they're like, "Yeah, it would be really fun." I'm like, "Okay, if we're going to do this, we got to have a name. I want to have like, kind of a plan." So within like a couple of days, we sat down and we came up with like 250 video ideas, and we're kicking around names. And it was just, I don't know. It was something that we had a couple of different options. I'm like, what about this? What about prime time? I was thinking TV, right? I'm thinking old school TV, like prime time TV. I'm like, how about prime time aquatics? Like, oh yeah, that'll be awesome. And that's just kind of took off from there.
So you're a college professor, a biology major with a minor in chemistry. You have a master's in biotechnology and chemical science, right?
That is true.
Do you bring fish keeping into the classroom?
I actually do. So, did the major in biology, minor in chemistry. I also have, so in addition to the biotechnology and chemical science masters, I did a master's cert in aquaculture and fish health, which was really cool. And I'm halfway through one in soil sciences as well. And one of the cool things is I teach biology majors and microbiology currently. And in the microbiology class, we talk a lot about the nitrogen cycle, the microbes that are involved in that process. We'll talk about water chemistry in both biology and microbiology. And it's a little strange because at the beginning of the semester, I have to tell my students, especially if I have any hybrid courses or online courses, oh, by the way, I've also got a YouTube channel, because I actually incorporate some of the videos I've done for YouTube into the classroom. So they serve a dual purpose.
Well, that's cool. Your video on the nitrogen cycle, like I thought about maybe making a video on it, but I can't beat the one that you've made. So I really like that one. You do an excellent job with it. Your how to hatch brine shrimp. I mean, I use the same style. I do it from learning from your video, except I use a pickle jar. But I mean, you've got some great educational videos. How do you come up with it all?
Usually what happens is I'm trying to solve a problem or deal with something, and I'm thinking about, okay, how do I want to approach this in our fish room? And if I'm doing something that I think is useful, then why not pull out the camera and put it on film as well? So it's usually one of those things where it's like, okay, keep the camera nearby. If I think I need to do something, let's go ahead and talk about it and share it.
There's a question from Recon252 here. Recon's asking, is there anything wrong with using standard filtered cartridges rather than biomedia?
I would say no. I would say the only downside, to using the filter cartridges is just the cost. For the most part, they're designed for the filter, so they're going to fit pretty easily. The one thing I don't like a lot about some of the filter cartridges is the carbon insert, at least for me personally, because if I'm doing plants, I don't want the carbon neutralizing some of the nutrients that the plants require. And again, the cost. And so I've just found if you cut out some filter floss and you just stick it in that filter, I don't even keep the plastic frames anymore. I just literally just put that filter floss in there, and then I just take it out every couple of weeks and change it out when it gets filthy. And it's a lot cheaper to do that. But other than that, yeah, you can use the filter cartridges. There's, for the most part, nothing wrong with it.
I'm with you. I used to use carbon, but it's sucking all the stuff out for the plants. So like when I buy like brand new filters, I would keep the carbon until it was dead and then throw it out. But I never buy anything brand new anymore. I'm always at the auctions looking for deals.
I'm the same way. We're big fans of both the auctions and the swaps for our local fish clubs. And there are a lot of deals to be had, whether that's hardscaping materials or fish or just even knowledge. I mean, I think that's one of the things that gets overlooked. Yeah, you can find a lot of good prices, doing the auctions and the swaps. But my goodness, when you start talking to people there and gaining knowledge from people who have been in the hobby for 35, 40, 50, 60 years, some of these guys in their 60s and 70s and the way they did it back in the 1960s and 1950s, that's some invaluable stuff.
Just before we get to Chris Weber, that's Palmer Aquatics question. Somebody earlier in the chat was asking if these get rebroadcast on podcasts. So Palmer Aquatics has got a podcast called Fish Aquarium Geeks, and he replays a lot of the interviews that I do. So if you want to listen to it on a podcast, you can check that out. So Palmer Aquatics question is, what is the hardest struggles of being a YouTuber?
Wow, that's a good question. I think part of it, and it's something I'm sure you can relate to, is the constant desire to do better than you've done before, and keeping that regular schedule where we try to put videos out every Wednesday, every Saturday, 9 a.m. they're going out, and just keeping that schedule with a full-time job. And if you've got kids or family or other commitments or school or work or whatever you've got, that can be a little bit of a grind, making sure that you do that. But then it seems like the further you go, the better you want to do. And so there's little things that, you kind of pick up on, like, oh, that's not going to do. I need to reshoot that. Or, you see something that's just not quite right. Or you this is going to sound crazy, but at least for me, I'll go downstairs, shoot a video, be like, oh, wow, you know what? Half my beard is sticking out to the point where I can't even focus on what I'm saying. So like,
you got to film your own videos is what you're saying?
Well, yeah, you got the little pull-out screen.
Yeah.
But it's really tiny. So sometimes you don't notice, like, oh, I've got like beard hairs that are sticking out like this. They're kind of, I'm like, all right, I got to go reshoot that because that looks really silly. But yeah, that constant grind, I think that's, as a YouTuber, that's one of the things that you deal with, but it can be a lot of work. I think the further you get into it, the more you want to put into it, the more effort. And, you start picking up on things that you've done in the past. Like, oh, you know what? I wish I could have tweaked that a little bit. And that takes a little bit of time.
For sure. There's been some comments in the chat here about saying, oh, I didn't realize that the carbon was going to kill my plants. Well, for me, like, I fertilize my tanks. So the carbon is going to suck that fertilizer out. So it's going to render it useless. So it's not going to kill your plants, but it's not going to help them either.
And that's exactly true. So it just, like you said, it's a neutral, it's neutralizing a lot of the nutrients. So it's like, if you're going to dump liquid fertilizers in there and then have the carbon suck some of that stuff out, it's combating one another, and it's not ideal.
Now, the one thing I would say that I sometimes do when if I have to use medication in one of these, then I've got an extra hang-on back filter instead of like pulling the canister filters apart, which I can have carbon in, put it in, help flush the medication out when I'm done.
That's a very good point. That's a great way to use carbon, because some of that medication, if it sticks around for a long time, it will definitely stress your fish.
It can, and it can kill your nitrogen, your beneficial bacteria there for you too. So Jason, what's your favorite fish?
Oh boy, I'm going to make some fish angry. It's funny because I think
we won't tell the others.
Yeah, please don't tell the other fish, and don't show them this video. I've actually done 2 or 3 videos of like, hey, our top 5 fish, but I always phrase it right now, because it's something new that's cool. Your interests change a little bit. So right now, my favorite fish is actually a fish that people generally don't see, and I don't get a chance to show it on camera a lot. We have it's a Bergmorii loach in our 75-gallon tank, and it's super cool. So imagine a loach it's probably about 6 inches long or so, kind of skinny, and it's got these alternating like green and almost purple and red stripes. And soon I'm going to make it a point to get that thing on camera again, because it's probably been a couple of years since I've shown it, and it's alive, but I usually have to feed bloodworms, and then sometimes it comes out, sometimes it doesn't. But that's probably my favorite fish in the fish room that I never see and nobody really gets to see.
Well, I'm with you, man. Like, I love plecos, and we don't get to see them too often. Maybe that's why I like them so much. We've got a question from Melvin here. That's Legacy Aquatics. So, Primetime Aquatics, what fish do you keep in your tanks? That's kind of a long question, but do you keep saltwater tanks? That's a shorter one for you.
Yeah, so we'll start with the short one. I don't do saltwater, and the reason for that is I don't have the time with the 60 tanks that we already have running. I think saltwater tanks look amazing, and I always envy them from afar. And you'll see these really beautiful setups, and I've even watched some saltwater YouTubers. I'm like, wow, that's really cool. Yeah, I want to do that. And I'm like, no, I don't. I don't want to go down that road yet. What do we keep in our fish room? So obviously everything is freshwater. We do a lot. I would consider myself a general hobbyist in the sense that I enjoy all kinds of fish. In fact, I just did a fish room tour of Andy's fish room, and he does all Guppies. And I thought those fish were so cool. And I've actually had a couple of species in my fish room. We do a lot of cichlids from all over the world. So we've got a lot of African cichlids, peacocks and haps and imbunas. We've got the Tanganyikan fish, like the shell dwellers and calvus and the featherfins, cyprichromis. I do like the cichlids from South and Central America. So we do a lot of like sahicas and Nanoluteus, Multispinosa. We've got the big Oscar. severums. So we have a lot of different types of fish in our fish room. I don't think that's ever going to change because I find all the different types of freshwater fish very interesting. We've gone through phases where right now we've got 4 or 5 tanks full of guppies, and I think they're awesome.
I've got a question from Jocelyn here. I'm a beginner needing to stock a tank. Can you put 3 Panda Corys and 5 guppies in a 10-gallon?
All right, so 3 Panda Corys and 5 guppies in a 10-gallon. Yeah, I don't see that being a problem. The only thing that you might want to think about is those Corys. The more you have, the cooler it's going to be. And so you get to a point, though, in a 10-gallon where those Panda Corys are decent size when they get full grown. And so you might not, where they would really show awesome personality in like a group of 6 or 8 or 10. With 3, they'll still have some personality. You'll see them kind of hanging out together, but it might not be what you would normally see if you've got a larger group of them. But the 5 guppies for sure. The Panda Corys, yeah, they'll fit just fine. They'll get along fine. The one thing you might want to take a look at if you're into Corys are the pygmy Corys. They're much, much smaller. They get to be maybe an inch. And that's something where you could probably keep 5, 6, or 7 of them along with those 5 guppies. And that would also be really cool.
Yeah, I've learned the hard way that Corys like to be in a group. They get lonely, and Panda Corys especially aren't the most hardy of the Corys. Like if you wanted to start with like an albino or something, those are tougher fish. We got a question from King Lee here, Twin Cities Guppies. Jason, my tap water is coming out with ammonia readings of 0.5 to 1. What is the best way to remove ammonia from my auto water change system?
Whew, that's a good question. So you've got 0.5 to 1. So I've done a couple of videos. I did a video, obviously, on how to lower ammonia. And then the other one was how sometimes your ammonia test kits can be not necessarily telling you the whole truth. So the first thing I would do is go back and take a look at that one video I did where I talk about why your ammonia test kit might be lying to you, and make sure that your ammonia that's coming out of the tap water is in fact unionized ammonia, UIA, because that's the ammonia that can be bad for you, right? So the ionized ammonia is not quite as bad for fish. Outside of that, if you're still having an issue, well, now if it's coming out of the tap that way, you can look at an RO system, which also removes a lot of the other stuff, which isn't necessarily ideal, especially for you because you've got a lot of guppies. So you probably like that water a little bit harder, in which case you'd have to remineralize that water after you go through that process. And then you've got lots of live plants, which will hopefully neutralize that stuff pretty fast. Things like pothos, but that's a tougher situation to deal with.
I'm not sure about this, but like my tap water comes out at 0.25, but I have done a little reading on it, and it's not ammonia. Sometimes the test kits are testing for ammonium, and they can't tell the difference. Is that correct?
That is absolutely correct. So any test kit that you have, you're getting both ammonium and ammonia. Again, you've got the unionized ammonia, which is the bad stuff, and then the ionized ammonia, which isn't quite as bad. And that's why you really want to go through. And in that video that I did, I've got a couple of links to ways to calculate the unionized ammonia. If that's really, really, really low or almost non-existent, you may not have as big a problem as you think you do.
Got a question from K-Town Reefer. If you could keep only 1 tank, which would it be?
Wow, that's a good question. If I could keep only 1 tank. So I'd probably narrow it down to either the multi-tank or the 75-gallon Mbuna tank. And I'd probably lean towards the multi-tank only because I like the colony that's in there and all the babies that are there. They don't eat the babies. So that's kind of cool to see them popping their little heads out of the shell. So I'd probably lean towards that one. But if you catch me on a different day, I might say, oh, no, the 75-gallon Mbuna tank, that would be the one.
All the color. Kendall, Otter Creek Aquatics is asking, what's the overall goal of this fish room?
So a couple things. And I actually, a long time ago, I did a video about pretty much answering this question. Why do we have the fish room? What was the purpose? And the number one purpose was it was a dream of mine. And so as a younger child, even into my adult years, I would have like literal dreams. Like I'd go to sleep like, oh my gosh, I've got this dream of having this awesome fish room. And then I'd wake up and be like, oh man, that didn't happen. I know lots of people have other types of dreams like, hey, I'm driving a Lamborghini. No, not me. It was a fish room. And so that was something where if I had the space, it was something I wanted to recreate. So that was the number one thing. It's just enjoyment as a hobbyist. That's if I never made any money on the fish room, if I never bred a fish, if the YouTube channel went away, nothing would change about the fish room. I would still do exactly what we're doing because I love it so much. And as we've kind of progressed, yeah, breeding has become a bigger part of that, just because we think it's really fun. And then, of course, you've got the YouTube side where we get to share what we're doing, and that's fun as well.
Got a question from Parasites here. Do you breed fish? Do you sell fish? Or is it mostly hobby and education?
So I'd say primarily it's hobby. Education would be the second thing. And yes, we do breed fish. And, you know, it's all kinds of fish. So we've got guppies, we've got all kinds of cichlids. And for the most part, when we breed those fish, the vast majority of the fish that we breed, when we sell them through local swaps and auctions and through our clubs, just because we found it easier. We can go ahead and, you know, in an auction or a club meeting or a swap, bag up 30, 35 bags of fish, take them there, sell them. And that's also a lot of fun, sharing those fish throughout the clubs.
Joseph from JH Aquatics had a good point about those 5 guppies turn into 100 pretty quickly. I was actually watching today a video of JH Aquatics where he is interviewing Luke from Primetime Aquatics. How involved are the kids in the fish hobby, Jason?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, that must have been from the last Aquatic Experience. Yeah. They're pretty involved, and it's gotten to the point where I'm really proud of what they do because they do a lot of the fish tank maintenance. And Luke, especially, I kind of call him like the fish room manager. If I tell him to, hey, go downstairs and get me 3 Cyprichromis males, and he can just go down there. And it dawned on me a couple months ago. It's like, wow, I can tell him things that probably a lot of people don't know, and we just take it for granted that he's got this knowledge. But they're heavily involved. They do a lot of the fish tank cleaning down there with me. We're down there, the 3 of us, a couple times a week. And, you know, I think it's taught them a lot of responsibility, and it's not something I generally have to be like, okay, you need to go down there and do the tanks. It's like, all right, guys, let's go down there. Let's take care of this, you know, these group of tanks. And they do a really good job. And yeah, I'm really proud of them.
As you should be. I've got a question here from Bran Awesome. Do you have any experience in reverse osmosis system? And do you think that should be something the average fish keeper should look into? So
the most experience I have when it comes to reverse osmosis is actually in one of the labs where I taught a number of years ago. So I don't have any experience from a hobbyist perspective. I would say with the reverse osmosis, just remember, you're going to be pulling out a lot of your minerals and stuff from your water. So if you want really soft water, and potentially a low pH without a lot of buffering capacity, you just have to be really careful. Often people use that RO water in conjunction with tap water to kind of bring the water hardness down a little bit. But understand, as you're bringing the water hardness down, you may be also lowering the carbonate hardness of that water, which means you could potentially have more fluctuation in pH, and that can be a dangerous thing. So yeah, RO water definitely has a place in the hobby, certainly for people who are keeping very soft water and very acidic water fish, you know, things like discus or some of the epistogramma that really need that soft water, really need that low pH. But just understand, the softer that water is, the less carbonate hardness you have in that water, the more likely that pH is going to fluctuate. So you have to be really careful with your water changes and make sure your tank maintenance at that point is really top notch, or you could potentially have a big problem.
Same with those Caridina shrimps, those like the RO water as well. Those are the red crystal, black crystal shrimp, for the people that don't know that out there. They like the RO water as well.
Absolutely, they do.
Will you have shirts at Aquashella?
So the short answer is no, because I'm going to fly out there, and I'm a minimalist when it comes to flying. I'm going to have my camera bag and one carry-on bag with just enough clothes for myself. At one point I thought about, so Kasha from Creative Pet Keeping, she's driving down there. She may have already left, but she's like, oh, I'll take whatever you want down there. And we're hoping to have shirts ready. We won't, but our website should be up really, really soon. So we'll have all the shirts and stuff hopefully on the website in the not too distant future.
That was, you just mentioned Kasha there. That was a really cool 2-part interview of Andrew's fish room that you guys did. He had some cool fish in there that I'd never seen before, right?
You know, and that's what was really cool. He lives really close to me, and I've seen him do, you know, some stuff through the Chicago Live Bear Society, and I've gotten to know him over the last year or so. And yeah, what's really cool about him is he really knows his fish. And so there was so much stuff that we could have talked about in that fish room tour that would have been like really nerdy for the science nerds and stuff. And I may still have to go back there at some point and really kind of get into some of that stuff. But he does such a good job of understanding where those fish are coming from, their habitats. he's really a Goodyear expert, and those fish are almost all of them are endangered. Some of them are extinct in the wild, and he's one of those people who are really trying to keep those fish alive for people to enjoy, and hopefully reintroduce them back into nature when those populations are really decimated.
He needs to have more subscribers. I don't know how he doesn't, but hopefully you guys spotlighting him, his channel will grow. What's a good dither fish to make neon tetras less shy? That's a question from Just Do in Florida.
That's a great question, because often I think of a neon as a dither fish, but so how could we make the neons come out? Well, I would say the larger the group you have, the less shy they're going to be. So depending on the size of the tank, if I had let's say a 55-gallon tank or a 40 breeder, I might want to put in 30 or 40 neon tetras, and that in and of itself can help quite a bit. But there are some tetras that I would say are less shy. So you've got things like the black tetras, some of the rasboras, the harlequin rasboras tend to be less shy. So you might want to look at other smaller, peaceful fish that are going to be out and about. Depending on your water parameters, if you can get away with guppies and neon tetras, the guppies will certainly be out. They don't care about anything. I mean, those guppies will be nibbling on your fingers when you clean in tanks and stuff. So those are just, some examples, but smaller fish that are going to be a little bit more outgoing. Like I said, those black neons, at least to me, those are another one that they just stay out pretty much all the time. For sure.
I've got mine with some Rummy-Nose tetra. And I wouldn't necessarily recommend Rummy-Nose for everyone, but the neons do sometimes join the school, and it looks pretty cool when they do. Got another question here. Would you recommend an adjustable heater or a preset heater for a smaller tank?
So that's a great question. Sometimes it's hard to even have a choice, right? A lot of the really small tanks, like the 2.5 or the 5 gallons, you go to a PetSmart or a Petco, and it's like, okay, the only option I have is this little tiny heater, and you stick it in, and there's no way to adjust it. And it's hopefully going to heat your tank to right around 78 degrees. We've used both. In fact, we have both in our fish room / rest of the tanks in the house. The only issue with the non-adjustable heaters is eventually those heaters are going to break down. And often what will happen is as that heater breaks down, the temperature gets a little bit lower, a little bit lower, a little bit lower, and pretty soon the thing doesn't work. Or the opposite can happen where the thing just gets stuck on, you wind up frying your fish. So that's certainly a disadvantage. The advantage, of course, is they tend to be a little bit cheaper, a little bit easier to find. But for us, first of all, we heat our fish room. So there's a few heaters in our fish tanks at this point. But when we started out, we actually heated each individual tank. And for all the tanks we use, at least in the basement, we use the adjustable heaters just because I wanted to be able to change the temperature. If something got sick, I want to be able to, hike that temperature with ick or something.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I've got warmer water fish. The other thing I would recommend is even if you do use a heater that has an adjustable temperature dial, still use a thermometer. And what I've always done is I will set that heater. Usually there's a light that indicates that the heater is on. So I'll turn it on, see where that puts me in terms of temperature before I ever put any fish in the tank, and then adjust that temperature based on what my thermometer is telling me, not what the temperature of the heater is telling me.
I'm totally with you there. Like if I have a sickness, like you mentioned, ick or something like that, I want to crank that heat well over 80. If I have like corridors or something, especially if I want them to get breeding, I need to turn that temperature down because they don't like it that hot. Got another question from Freshwater Joe here. What's a fish you wanted to keep but never got your hands on?
So there are some really cool Cyprochroma species that I haven't yet had the opportunity to keep. I would say that would be one. The other one is it's an oddball fish. I had it when I was in my 20s, and that is a purple spot goby. I had this 35-gallon hexagon, and I would never do this in a million years again. But in that tank, I had a Jack Dempsey that was it was smaller Jack Dempsey, this purple spot goby, and there was something else in there. I don't remember. It was a cichlid. It was a horrible. You would never do that, and I would not recommend it. But that purple spot goby, I used to throw like little feeder fish. Again, something I wouldn't do at this point, but when you're in your young 20s and 25 years ago, I was like, oh, you didn't think about this stuff.
I had piranhas.
Yeah. So, but this purple spot goby would just sit at the bottom of the tank. It had these little tiny eyes and this gigantic mouth, huge mouth. And it was one of the most beautiful fish that I've seen. And a couple of times I've seen him at a fish store around here. And each time I've passed on it. And every time I do, I kick myself because that is a fish that I really want to keep and really want to breed.
I've got a question here from Cameron that's learning to fish keep. He's saying, what's your favorite tank size?
Ooh, that's a good question. We've done a couple videos on comparing different tank sizes. And actually, one of the videos I did that I thought was relatively useful is we talked about tanks, and not necessarily in terms of gallons, but in terms of the surface area that you're provided by that tank. And so I made the point in that video, like you can compare a 40-gallon breeder to a 55-gallon. And especially important when you're keeping cichlids, that 40-gallon breeder may be a much better size because of the area that you're getting at the bottom, especially for fish that like the bottom of the tank. There's more surface area or, bottom area to that tank than there's a 55-gallon. If I had to pick one in terms of my favorite tank size, it would be something that gives me the greatest opportunity to keep the greatest number of fish that I can, or variety. It'd probably be a 125. I think it's something where, one, I can get it in my basement and not, have to remove stairs or something. If we're looking at a more, a smaller size tank, I really like the 40-gallon breeders because I think you can keep a fair number of fish in there because you're getting all that space at the bottom of the tank. It's still relatively high, so you've got a tank that's 3 feet long. It's 18 inches, front to back, and somewhere around that 18, 19 inches, maybe 20 inches. I don't remember exactly tall. So that's a lot of variety there. After you get beyond that, then you're like, okay, what does the 55 offer? And then beyond that, you're looking at a 75. But that 40-gallon breeder is awesome. The other one I like, if you're on the smaller side, is the 20-gallon long. Love those tanks. I think we've got like 8 of them in our fish room right now, 7 or 8. And I love that tank. And it's always surprising to me that, we've got the kit tanks and stuff at PetSmart and Petco, and they sell the 20 highs as a kit, but not the 20 longs. And I think that's a missed opportunity because those shorter tanks are easier to work on than, let's say, a 29 or a 37. And they give you that length and all that bottom area. Really cool.
You're in the Chicago Cichlid Club. Are you in any other fish clubs?
Yeah, so we're really in a good shape here in the Chicagoland area. So we've got the Greater Chicago Cichlid Association. That's the GCCA. Great club. They bring in a lot of top-notch speakers from all over the world. They have huge swaps and auctions. Really cool place to be. I'm also part of the Greenwater Aquarius Society. It's kind of a generalist club. That place is really cool because we'll meet once a month on a Friday and we sit around and we eat, and sometimes they'll have speakers there. And then I recently, in the last year or so, joined the Chicago Live Bear Society, which is also really cool. And so that's where I got to know Andrew a little bit more, learn a lot more about the Guppies and the other live bears. So part of those 3 clubs, all of them are very awesome.
So you've been on YouTube now for almost 2 years. Took you about 7 months to hit that 1,000 subscriber mark. At what point did your channel just start blowing up?
I'm not sure if it's ever really blown up. It's kind of, at least in my mind, it hasn't. It's just been a slow and steady increase. And, it's one of those things where I never had like a video like, oh my gosh, I've got 500,000 views on this video. But it's just been people sharing the videos. And, I think the viewers themselves and the people who subscribe to Primetime Aquatics and share the videos and make, the channel known to others, that's been a big part of it. And, I owe them a debt of gratitude for that because I'm only one person and I can do my stuff, but if people don't see it, it doesn't matter. And I really credit a lot to the viewers who share the stuff and show it to their friends. And it's been a big help.
I've got a non-fish question for you. So you live in Chicago, but I've noticed there's right at the top of the stairs, there's a Cincinnati Reds pennant. Does that mean you're a Reds fan or what?
So, I don't mind the Reds. But what we do is, as a family, often in the summertime, we'll go to different baseball parks and kind of make that part of our vacation. So we've been to Cincinnati, we've been to Pittsburgh and Cleveland and Minnesota. Trying to think where else. St. Louis, Milwaukee. We actually, believe it or not, we haven't been to Wrigley Field yet as a family. The White Sox. So we've been to all these different parks, and that's just one of the things that we like to do. So a lot of times you'll see sports memorabilia from other teams, and that's really why. Because like, oh wow, we picked up this thing from when we went to Cincinnati, or it's like a souvenir.
That's cool. That's cool. I got a question from Kendall here, Otter Creek Aquatics. What's the biggest challenge you've had in your fish room?
That's a great question. The biggest challenge we've had in our fish room. I would say just the general day-to-day stuff. You know, when you get a fish room kind of around that 60 tank mark, just feeding the fish every day and the time that it takes. You know, I've done videos on how much did it, you know, I've been very open about what did it cost to build our fish room? What does it cost to maintain it on a monthly basis? How much time does it take to maintain? I would say there's not any one huge challenge. Building it out, we didn't build it in a week. We just kind of built it in phases and in steps. So that wasn't necessarily overwhelming, but just the daily amount of time. So when I go down and feed my fish, for a lot of people, if they've got 1 or 2 tanks, feeding the fish is not even something that takes that really any time.
Right.
But with 60 tanks, I have to, you know, I'll wake up 30 minutes earlier than I need to, because I know in the morning it's going to take me about 30 minutes to feed the fish, to make sure that the brine shrimp all settle so I can, you know, suck those out with a turkey baster and feed all the babies. And then I do the same thing at night. So right there, every day, I know I've got 1 hour just feeding the fish committed to the fish room. So I would say that's the biggest challenge is really the time that it takes, you know, on a daily basis. And that's not even counting the maintenance side where we're doing that 2 or 3 days a week. And that might take an hour and a half each time we do that.
I saw that Fish Tropic had a question here. What room of the house are you going to expand to next? But Joanna came in the chat and answered for him. She's told you can have the garage next.
That would be pretty. Yeah, she's like, I don't know where she got this from. Like, I mean, she must have found something on the internet.
You can fit a big tank in there, probably.
Well, and that's what's so dangerous, because people ask me all the time, are you going to get bigger tanks? And the problem I have is when you go into our basement, the stairs, they turn. So they go one direction, they got like the landing, and then they go back the opposite direction. So there's only so much space I can do. Like, even though one of the most difficult things we ever had to do is get the 150, that 4 foot by 2 foot, you know, by 30-inch 150. That tank was really heavy. I remember my brother and I moved that downstairs, and that was really challenging. We didn't have a lot of space side to side to get that down there. The 125s, Joanna and I actually moved we've got 2 set up. We've got 2 more that are going to be set up soon. That was not fun. So it's like, I'd love to get some 180s or a 220 down there. I just think I have this horrible feeling it would get wedged somehow in the stairs, and then somebody would be like trapped downstairs, and it would just be stuck there. So the garage, if we ever did something with the garage where we built out part of it where it could be insulated, well, now you're
talking 800-gallon.
I could back up a semi truck, you know. I'd be like, okay, you know what? Let's just, how big can we go, you know? So.
Don Gallagher is asking, besides fish keeping, have you got any other hobbies?
Well, actually, I mean, I don't know if it's a hobby, but a lot of my spare time is centered around the boys. They play baseball, and I coach one of the teams. I'm the head coach of one team. I'm a assistant coach on the other, and that takes up an unbelievable amount of time because they start indoor practices in January. And then right now, today was the first day that we were able to get outside and practice, because in the Chicagoland area, it's usually pretty cold. And then we go right into baseball season, which happens. We'll start playing games, and we actually have a tournament next weekend. And that happens all the way through. The regular season ends in June, and then July's more tournaments. Then they get 2 weeks off, and then we got fall ball, and then we take like a month or 2 off in the fall, and we start all over again. So that takes up an incredible amount of time.
I know what you mean. I coach both my kids' baseball teams, and it's 5 or 6 days a week. But hey, you know what? It's their turn.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's a lot of fun. And for me, it's probably more work because I have to be at all the practices, but at least the boys, for them, it's not too overwhelming where they're only at, baseball a couple times a week. So it's not too bad. What's
your biggest accomplishment in breeding?
I don't know if I've done anything super crazy. It's mostly cichlids. I don't find most cichlids to be extremely hard to breed, although there are some really difficult ones out there. I would say probably the ones I got most excited about were our peacock gudgeons. And if you've never seen them, we did a species profile. It's like the 2nd or 3rd video I ever did. The audio is horrible. The camera work is terrible. Like, everything about it is horrible, but those fish are really cool. They've got a lot of color, a lot of personality, and they stay really small. So you can put them in a 10-gallon tank. But we started breeding those fish, and we bred hundreds and hundreds of them. And the fry are super, super, super tiny. So just keeping those things alive, I felt like, at least for me, it was a big accomplishment. It's certainly not something that's like, wow, you bred peacock gudgeons. That's amazing. People do it all the time. But for me, that was one of the ones I was probably most proud of and the one I enjoyed the most.
I like that video that you came out with today, actually, because I I've only ever used the breeder boxes inside the tank, but I have looked at those ones before, and I think that video has convinced me that I've got to go out and get one.
You know, we at one point I bought the ones that go on the inside. It's just like the mesh ones.
Yeah, that's all I use. Yeah.
And so they're like the little suction cup things, and the ones I bought, they're supposed to float, right? So however high, you know, the water level is, they're supposed to maintain themselves so they're a little bit above the water level. Well, what invariably happens is those suction cups, they kind of release themselves from the side of the tank, or the little sliders that are there they get stuck. And so the next thing you know, you're like, oh my goodness, my breeder box is underwater. My fish are gone.
I've got my Jimmy rigged with elastics and everything to make sure it doesn't fall. Yeah.
You know, I did the same thing. I actually took some like the plastic clamps that you would, you know, buy at Home Depot or something. I got these things all clamped to the sides of the tank. I'm like, well, this looks ridiculous, but it works, but it's not ideal.
It works, but yeah, I definitely want to change it up. Sponge filter versus hang on back, 177,000 views. Did you think that video was going to be that successful? And what is your favorite video that you've done so far?
That's one of the surprising things. There are times where I'll put out a video and be like, all right, well, it's just an average video. It's, you know, it was something I thought was cool, but I wasn't expecting it to get that many views. I don't know. It was really interesting. That was a video I did about maybe a little over maybe a year or 3 months ago. Yeah. And it was right around Thanksgiving. I remember thinking, okay, put that out there. I'm like, at that time, we weren't anywhere near the size we are now. I'm like, oh, that's getting some decent amount of views. And I checked it a couple of days later. I'm like, oh my gosh, what is going on here? And we started getting all these subs from it. I'm like, and it's funny because what happens is with that video, every 3 or 4 months, something happens where it peaks. And I always know when it does, because I start looking at the sub counts. I'm like, oh, that went up. It must be that sponge filter video again is being suggested or something. But no, I had not in a million years would I have thought that video would get those kinds of views. In terms of videos that it's just interesting. The ones I'm sometimes most excited about, those are ones I'm like, huh, nobody really was excited about that the way I was.
Sometimes. No one else cares about what type of algae scraper I'm using.
Yeah.
I've got a good question here from Andrew Cummins. With so many tanks, do you treat for parasites and fungal diseases preemptively or only after it's found?
That's a great question. So what I recommend is if you're buying fish from certainly any pet store, and that's not a knock on pet stores, it's just they're bringing so many fish in and they've got wholesalers and sometimes they don't get a chance to do, a proper quarantine. The pet stores may or may not. If I'm buying fish from a pet store, I will quarantine them in a tank. And I generally don't treat them for anything unless I see something is wrong, because one of the things that I'm concerned about is, one, meds are always going to stress fish to a certain degree, right? Even though they're relatively safe. I'm not saying they're going to kill your fish, but they do stress your fish. So you're taking your fish from, maybe they went from a wholesaler to a pet store, and a couple days later or the same day or the next day, they're going to your house. So they've been in 3 different environments. They've been in bags for most of that time. They're stressed out. And one of the things that is a major contributor to fish disease is stress. And so now you're taking them back into your fish room or your fish tank, and now you're just bombarding them with meds, which also stress the fish out. So what I prefer to do is I'll put the fish in a quarantine tank and I'll keep a very close eye on them for that time that they're in there. I did a video on how to quarantine fish, and that was really based on the work that I did in the aquaculture and fish health program that I went through. And one of the things that is highly recommended is making sure, if you're going to quarantine fish, if you're going to take the time to quarantine your fish, do it for 4 weeks. Because what often happens is if you quarantine your fish for a week or 2 weeks, sometimes they will harbor disease, and that disease will not show itself until 2 or 3 weeks later. And by that point, if you've already got them in your main tank, you could have a really big problem. So with the fish that we bring in, if we're bringing them in from a pet store, they absolutely always go in quarantine. There have been a couple times, depending where I get them, I will put the ick meds in there, because for me, that's the most likely thing that's going to happen, is they're going to develop ick in 3 or 4 days. So sometimes I'll pre-treat that, but it's very, very rare. Now, that being said, the vast majority, the overwhelming majority of the fish that we've gotten in the last, I would say, 1.5 to 2 years have come from fellow hobbyists through the clubs and the swaps. And so you get an opportunity to know the people, their fish rooms, their fish tanks, they're not harboring disease. I feel a little bit more comfortable bringing those in there have been a couple times where I put those in, and even some of the viewers have noticed, hey, you didn't quarantine those fish. Well, no, but I know the person where they came from. I know his tanks. I know his setup.
Yeah.
And it's a chance where it's a risk versus reward. So what I can say is, in the couple of years that I've been doing this, I haven't gotten any sick fish from the clubs or the swaps, right? So I don't have any outbreak of disease. So there's a really strong track record there. But even still, if you're buying fish from swaps and clubs and auctions, and you really don't know where those fish are coming from, I'd still quarantine them. But again, I don't use the meds unless I have to. The other issue there is when it comes to antibiotics, something that we talk a lot about in my microbiology courses is antibiotic resistance. And what's interesting is that you can, if antibiotic resistance is created in a non-related organism, let's say fish, some microbes have the ability to exchange genes. And so they can take those antibiotic resistant genes and transfer them to microbes that do in fact contribute to disease in human beings. And so that's always something that's in the back of my mind. And I want to try to minimize that as much as I possibly can.
That's a great way of explaining it. I know that overuse of antibiotics can make them not as effective, but you did the great way of explaining it. And Long Island Fish Guy says, I'm a big cute quarantine guy, and prime time is spot on right now. A lot of people's first videos or first couple of videos aren't a good representation of what they're doing later. But I thought right from the beginning, you have started off with a bang. It's been good from the beginning. Did you have a plan, like how you were going to start?
Yeah, and that goes back to when we were talking with the boys, where we kind of laid it out and said, okay, well, what do we want to do? What is it that we want to do with a YouTube channel? And so we had all these ideas. I go back and I left the first videos up there, and I kind of look at those things now. I'm like, wow, there's so many things I would have done differently had I known. So the first video, if you were to go back and watch it, you'll see that the camera is just kind of like floating all over the place. And that was Luke, and he did the best job he could, but we didn't know anything about, how to keep a camera stable. We didn't know about audio. So that whole video was literally shot on a Samsung Galaxy, whatever I had, like a Galaxy S4 or 5 or something. Yeah. And he's just trying to hold it there. All the audio is just directly from the phone itself. And so as you go on, you learn, okay, well, how do I improve the audio because that didn't sound very good? Or how do I improve the video because that was kind of shaky, or the transitions were choppy, or there's just things that I don't like about it. And so it's just, it comes with time, I suppose. And I'm nowhere near where I want to be. I still look at the videos and like, there's things that I want to do, and it's going to take some more time to hammer that out. But yeah, I would say the earlier ones, they're a little rough, some of the lighting and the audio and stuff.
Oh, I disagree. I think they're good. Joanna, that's Mrs. Primetime Aquatics, for all of you who don't know who that is in the chat there. She has her own video, which is on top 5 fish. I believe Jason was sick that day, so he couldn't perform it. And she's also in another video where she gets a betta for Mother's Day. And I was just wondering, are we going to see more of Joanna? Is she going to are you guys maybe going to do a live stream with Joanna? What do you think?
I think that's the plan at some point. So yeah, she's going to definitely be in more videos. It's just sometimes it doesn't work out where we can actually do the stuff together. But a lot of the later aquascape videos that we've done, she's done all the work. It's just we haven't had a chance to work her in. But the plan is to try to get her in the videos more. And she does. She comes through when I lose my voice and I can't talk, and she can go through and talk about her top 5 fish or her bettas. One of the things that's going to be coming up soon is I've got a section of the fish, believe it or not, the basement that's still be built out. And so I've got 225-gallon tanks. I've still got to build the stands, which I'm actually dreading because I don't like building stands. But I'm going to put a couple 125s up, and then she's going to have what she's been asking for forever, and she's going to have her nano fish tank wall. And so once that happens, I'm going to let her kind of explain what she's doing with those tanks, and that's going to kind of be her thing. And we'll probably see periodic videos about that when she's got that ready to go.
I saw a question earlier, but I can't remember who asked it. How would you treat guppy fin rot?
Well, it can be a little bit of a mess, really. There's a couple things you can do. I mean, there are meds, right? So you can use the anti-protozoals, you can use antibiotics. Temperature will sometimes help, increasing the temperature. Salt certainly helps. And so I just had somebody, they were contacting me on, I think it was Facebook. They contacted me through my Primetime Aquatics Facebook, and they had some cichlids that had all kinds of stuff going on. They thought it was Popeye, dropsy, bloat, and there was a couple other things that were happening. And one of the things that I recommended at that point was, okay, well, let's get the temperatures up. Let's get salt in the tank. Let's go ahead and use the antibiotics. The general cure is a good one, metronidazole. And they basically bombarded the tank with those meds. And I got a message actually yesterday, said, oh yeah, that actually worked. Killed off all the beneficial bacteria in the process, which is to be expected, but it did help their fish. So, and one of the things it's kind of interesting is, even though I went through that entire program, I don't have a lot of fish disease in my fish room. And so, at least from an experience perspective, I'm actually not a really good person to ask when it comes to treating fish disease. I've treated ick, a number of times, but a lot of the other stuff, because one, we generally get healthy fish, so I don't have a lot of issues. And with that, it's like people who deal with a lot of fish disease are probably better at answering those questions than I am, because I'm telling you sometimes what, I learned through the program, but not necessarily some of the stuff that I can personally vouch for and say, oh yeah, I did this, 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 and this, and then my fin rot went away, when I really don't experience a lot of that. Yeah,
I know what you mean. It is much easier if you've already experienced it. So clown loaches are my favorite fish, which you've got some beautiful ones there. And I was watching one of your videos on the red-tailed shark. Now, I had a red-tailed shark once for 3 days, and it constantly chased the clown loaches around like nonstop, relentlessly, until my second biggest clown loach died. So I ended up returning the red-tailed shark back. What would be what's a good tank mates for that red-tailed shark?
So invariably, at least it seems like all the red-tailed sharks I've ever had, they start out kind of sweet and cute, and they're about 1.5 inches or 2 inches, and they look amazing. And then somewhere around their teenage years, which for them is like maybe 3, 4, 5 years old, they've gotten some size, and they can turn into real jerks. So for us, I generally if I'm keeping red-tailed sharks, I keep them with semi to mostly kind of aggressive fish. And so in our 75-gallon, we've got them with severums. There's a leaf tinapoma. That Bergmorii loach I was talking about, that loach is actually more aggressive than our red-tailed shark. When I put that in there, I actually had my clown loaches in that 75-gallon with the red-tailed shark, and they were okay. But once I added that Bergmorii loach, that thing went crazy, and it shoved the 2 clown loaches into a rock, would not let them out, and then put the red-tailed shark in his place. And even when it's feeding time, if I put bloodworms in that tank and the red-tailed shark is there eating the bloodworms, that loach goes out there and moves that red-tailed shark to the side and will eat the bloodworms right out of the severum's mouth. So definitely clown loaches, red-tailed sharks. I don't see that as necessarily being a good mix. But red-tailed sharks, usually some not super aggressive South American cichlids, but if you've got things like severums or maybe some geophagus, you got to be careful there, especially with the fins. That tends to work out a little bit better.
They're beautiful fish. Maybe one day I'll attempt it again. Andrew Cummins has a question here. What do you think about running Paragard for 1 week every 8 weeks in tanks that have a good amount of turnover? I think you kind of already answered this question.
Yeah, again, I'm not a huge fan of using meds unless I absolutely need to. And so the Paragard, again, it's going to be a stressor. You just have to keep in mind, if you're talking about a tank that's got high turnover, I could certainly see an argument why you might want to do that. Again, so here's the thing. Most fish are probably going to have some type of parasite, especially when they come from the wild. So if they come from the wild and you're going to add them to a tank of domestically raised fish, you're going to have to quarantine. You're going to have to treat them. Otherwise, they could bring some really nasty stuff into your tank. But I'm not 100% convinced that some of the internal parasites are necessarily horrible for your fish. There are examples, at least in terms of human beings, where not having some internal parasites have had negative impacts. And so, for instance, one of the things that we talk about in microbiology is the fact that there is a much higher incidence of things like Crohn's disease and irritable bowel syndrome and these intestinal diseases in the developed Western world. And when scientists tried to research, well, why is that? Why is there a higher incidence of internal problems, intestinal issues in the developed world? And so if you go to some place like on the continent of Africa, parts of India, parts of South America, the incidence rates are far less. And one of the reasons why they think that may be the case is that there are some internal parasites that actually teach our immune system how to relax, how to chill out, how not to overreact, because these internal parasites will send out messages to our immune system that says, hey, leave me alone. I'm okay, even though they're not necessarily okay. So when it comes to fish, I think there's a little bit of that as well. If you think about what's going on in nature, a lot of the fish have internal parasites. They're not dying super fast. Many of them can be healthy. I'm not saying that's always the case, but I'm also not 100% sure that every single parasite that ever exists in a fish needs to be cured and needs to be free from that.
I'm with you there. I definitely go cautious when I'm medicating. And also remember, when you're medicating, it can kill your beneficial bacteria. So I wouldn't just throw it in there just on a whim. How do you do your water changes?
So water changes are kind of interesting. One of the things that we decided early on when we built the fish room was that we didn't want to drill our tanks. I didn't want to do that. I had enough going on with setting them all up and building stands. And quite frankly, I was a little concerned. I mean, I didn't want to be drilling through glass.
Me neither.
So what we did is we set up PVC all around the perimeter of both sides of the fish room, drilled holes large enough so that we could run a gravel vac from the tanks into that PVC, and all that PVC runs into the floor drain. And so when we're draining tanks, we can drain as many tanks as we have hoses. And so for the three of us, for me and Luke and Eli, if we're doing it together, we can usually drain about 6 or 7 tanks at a time. And that actually moves pretty fast. So we kind of split the fish room up in thirds. We'll do whatever percentage water change needs to be done based on the amount of nitrates that accumulate over a week. So we kind of get a feel for that early on. And then we, some tanks get a 20%, some are 10, some are 50%. Just depends on the tank. And then refilling it, we've got a sink downstairs, and I kind of built, there's a 50-foot hose, and I built a little attachment out of PVC, and we can just kind of slap that onto the side of the tank and fill it, and then just turn it on and off from the area where we hook onto the tank itself, and just go through and fill out the tank. So it's a little bit more time consuming than doing, auto water change, but I think it's definitely more efficient than pretty much any other way I can think of.
We have gone past our 1 hour mark, but I do have 2 questions left. Do you have time, Jason, for 2 more?
Sure.
What was it like touring Lucas Brett's?
Oh my goodness. So that was, I've been watching Lucas for a long time, and he's one of those people who loves to investigate his ecosystems. And going there, it was really interesting because I didn't, sometimes it's kind of hard. You watch a video, it's like, okay, what room is he in? How is this all fitting together? And he doesn't have a fish room. He's got a fish house.
Yeah.
There's tanks all over the place.
300 plus tanks, right?
Oh yeah. And it's so cool to see because he's doing something that I haven't seen a lot of, and that is really understanding the balance inside those fish tanks. And so a lot of his tanks are everything you have been taught to do. He basically goes and turns that on its head. So, you got to have, this big FX6 or, 5 canister filters on your 300 gallon. And I look at his 300 gallon, he's got nothing, nothing. I mean, it's just a tank, a bunch of plants. Now it's not heavily stocked, but that ecosystem is relatively well balanced. And a lot of his tanks are like that, anywhere from, 5 gallon, 10 gallon. There's virtually no traditional filtration. Sponge filters are largely missing. There's no hang on the backs, nothing like that. A lot of
not even air stones, right?
Well, some of them do.
Yeah.
He's actually even gotten away.
Some don't, right?
Yeah. He's even gotten away from that to a certain extent, just to see, okay, can the ecosystem be supported without that? And he's doing some really cool stuff there. So it was eye-opening in the sense that it's things that I always thought could kind of be done. And there's some things we've kind of played with on the edges, in our fish room, but he's doing it on a big scale and doing it well.
Okay, last question that I've got here. You ask everyone this question when you do a tour. So I'll ask you, someone new to fish keeping, what's the best advice you can give them?
Oh man, my own question thrown at me. I've never actually had to answer that before. I usually just ask it. I would say, especially for the new fish keeper, patience. That is the number one thing. When something goes wrong in the fish keeping hobby, for somebody who's new, it's usually because there was a lack of patience involved. So for instance, you get a tank, you set it up, and the next day, let's go pile a bunch of fish in there. Why? Because it's going to be cool. You want to see fish in a new tank. I would say one of the main things is get that tank set up, do your homework, understand the basics of water parameters, the nitrogen cycle, making sure that you've got a fish tank that can sustain life. I like the idea of adding plants to a tank before you add fish. Watch those things grow. I know Corey from Aquarium Co-op. He's a big fan of, hey, when you've got algae in the tank, and I tend to agree with that. Once you start to see life grow, you can begin to very slowly add a bio load to that tank. But I would say usually when you lose patience and you just start adding a lot of fish, or maybe don't do your research and now you've got fish that aren't going together. I get a lot of questions in my comments section. Hey, what do I do about, my ammonia spike or my nitrites, or now I've got these fish that are killing each other. What am I going to do about it?
Yeah.
At that point, there's not a lot of easy answers, because to deal with the ammonia and the nitrite is going to be time consuming. If you've got fish that aren't working out together, because maybe we just like, oh my gosh, that fish is awesome. Yeah, awesome. I'll make it work. And it doesn't. Okay. Well, now we got to admit this didn't work. And don't be afraid to admit that. Don't be afraid to admit, I tried this thing. I tried these fish together. It didn't work. It's okay. Now the next step is, okay, well, how do we fix that? Do we bring it back to the fish store? Do we have somebody we can give those fish to? But patience, and don't be afraid to admit, okay, whatever I tried didn't work.
I don't know if you saw Aquarium Co-op's video today, but he just got some new African cichlids, actually, and I can't think of the name of them, but you've just featured them a couple ago, and the females are yellow and the males are blue.
Yeah, that's the Pseudotrophia psilocybe. Those are fantastic cichlids. One of my favorite mbunas. They stay relatively small and they are super colorful. They're awesome.
I just want to thank everybody for stopping in and joining us today. I've had a great time with Jason. Thank you so much to the mods for all your hard work today. Thank you for the super chats. I really appreciate that. And most importantly, thank you, Jason. This was awesome. I've been looking forward to it for a while, and it turned out to be everything I thought it would be. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate being on. It's been an honor.
Have fun at Aquashella, and maybe one of these days I'm going to make it to one of these things as well. So
it'd be awesome to see you. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. Have a good night, and join me next week for another edition of Friday Fish Facts.